I was the last one in the office. Then she appeared and whispered with me. The office was quieter than I'd ever known it. Normally, the soft hum of computers, the occasional clatter of keyboards, and a low murmur of conversation filled the space. Tonight, it was just me, or so I thought. My shoes echoed faintly on the polished floor as I stepped in, the smell of leftover coffee lingering in the air, warm but slightly bitter. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a pale glow, stretching long shadows across the desks. Even the familiar stack of papers on my desk looked different in the emptiness, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I dropped my bag onto the chair, feeling the smooth leather press against my fingers. My shoulders carried the fatigue of a long day, a subtle tension that seemed to settle in my chest. There was something about the silence, the way it wrapped around me, quiet but expectant, that made the ordinary act of turning on my computer feel loaded with anticipation. I tried to focus on the work ahead, reviewing reports, scrolling through spreadsheets, but my mind kept wandering, restless in the stillness. Somewhere behind me, I thought I heard the faint shuffle of movement, almost imperceptible. I paused, listening. The sound disappeared as quickly as it came, leaving only the soft tick of the clock on the wall. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a quiet, inexplicable awareness that I wasn't truly alone. The office, though empty of co-workers, suddenly felt charged, a subtle tension that made the hairs on my arms prickle. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to shake off the feeling, but it lingered. I reminded myself to focus, to stay professional. Yet even in the stillness, I sensed a presence nearby, someone observing, perhaps judging, but in a way that felt intimate rather than critical. My fingers brushed over the smooth surface of a desk, tracing the edge, grounding myself. I caught the faint scent of her perfume in the air, warm, understated, a fragrance that seemed to wrap around me and settle just behind my shoulders. It made my chest tighten, a mixture of anticipation and hesitation swirling together. I straightened in my chair, trying to regain control of my thoughts. She was my boss, and yet in this quiet, empty office, her presence felt profoundly personal. Every small sound, the soft hum of the AC, the distant clatter from another floor, the subtle shift of a chair, seemed amplified, a reminder that I was on the verge of something I couldn't yet name. My heartbeat picked up, not from exertion, but from the strange, magnetic awareness that the ordinary act of staying late had suddenly become charged with possibility. The office lights reflected off the polished floor, highlighting the stillness, and for a moment, I allowed myself a private acknowledgement of how unusual it felt. The way anticipation could fill a space normally defined by deadlines and numbers. I wasn't just working late tonight. Someone was here with me, and I had no idea how close I already felt to being caught in the quiet pull of her presence. I was buried in numbers and deadlines, the glow of my monitor illuminating the fatigue etched into my face. The office was still, almost reverent in its emptiness, until the quiet was broken by a sound that made me tense, a soft shuffle of footsteps behind me. My head jerked up instinctively, eyes scanning the empty rows of desks. Nothing, and yet the subtle sense of being watched prickled along my spine. Then came a voice, calm, controlled, yet intimate in its simplicity. "You're working late," she said. I froze, my fingers hovering above the keyboard. The words were ordinary, almost mundane, yet there was a cadence to them, a warmth beneath the professionalism that made my chest tighten. I hadn't even seen her approach, but suddenly the space felt smaller, closer, alive with her presence. I turned slowly, and there she was, poised, graceful, a quiet confidence in the curve of her shoulders and the way her head tilted slightly as she looked at me. She wore a tailored blouse that softened around her arms, paired with a pencil skirt that fell just below her knees, the outfit elegant, but effortlessly age-appropriate. The dim office lights cast gentle shadows on her face, highlighting the subtle warmth of her skin and the faint lines that gave her an air of experience, of quiet wisdom. Even in her professional attire, she exuded a presence that made the room feel charged. Her eyes met mine, steady and knowing. The moment stretched, and I was acutely aware of every detail. The faint shimmer of her hair brushing against her shoulders, the soft click of her heels as she shifted weight, the delicate scent of her perfume weaving through the stale office air. There was no need for theatrics. The tension existed in the small, almost imperceptible gestures. The way she held her gaze just a second longer than expected, the subtle tilt of her head that invited attention. I swallowed, trying to ground myself, to remind myself of boundaries, of professionalism. And yet, even as rational thought urged caution, I felt a pull, a magnetic tug toward her presence. The quiet intensity of the office, combined with the subtle intimacy of her words, made it impossible to ignore the flutter of anticipation in my chest. She stepped closer, and with each movement, the warmth radiating from her felt tangible. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the awareness that I was standing on the edge of something unspoken. The air between us seemed to vibrate with possibility, each second stretching just enough to feel infinite. The ordinary act of staying late at the office had transformed into a moment suspended in time, charged by her proximity and the quiet confidence she carried effortlessly. I cleared my throat, tried to reclaim composure, but my hands betrayed me, tapping nervously against the desk. Even from a distance, the energy she radiated pressed against me like gravity, steady, inevitable, compelling. And in that brief, quiet heartbeat, I realized that tonight would not be just another late night at work. It was the beginning of something I wasn't ready to name, a slow, delicate pull that already had me leaning closer, even before she spoke again. The air in the office felt suddenly heavier, almost charged, as if the fluorescent lights themselves were dimming in anticipation. I was acutely aware of every sound, the soft hum of the AC, the distant echo of a janitor somewhere down the hall, and, closest of all, the subtle rhythm of my own heartbeat, quickening without my permission. She stood near me, a presence I couldn't ignore, and every instinct in my body told me this wasn't just a professional moment. She leaned in, not abruptly, not with any overt display, but deliberately enough that the space between us shrank. The faint brush of her hair against my temple sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. Her voice softened, lower than it had been before, intimate and teasing but still entirely composed. "With me," she said. It wasn't just the words, it was how she said them. Almost casual, yet carrying an unspoken weight that pulled at me. My chest tightened, and I felt a peculiar warmth gather there, spreading slowly, tingling in a way that made my thoughts stumble. The scent of her perfume enveloped me more distinctly now, sweet but grounded, a scent I would recognize anywhere. It pressed against my senses, and for a moment, I could barely breathe. I caught myself staring at the curve of her shoulder, the gentle slope that the blouse outlined with effortless elegance. Her proximity made the air feel different, warmer somehow, and I noticed the subtle shift of her posture, just a tilt of her head, a small step closer, and it was enough to make the office feel impossibly intimate. I could see the faint line of her jaw, the softness of her cheek, and the way her eyes lingered on mine, steady but expectant. My fingers twitched against the edge of the desk, almost wanting to reach, almost wanting to feel the warmth of her hand, even briefly. I knew it was inappropriate. I knew the age gap, the power dynamics, and the unspoken rules of the office all whispered caution in my mind. And yet, in that suspended moment, all I could feel was the magnetic pull toward her. Time seemed to stretch. A clock ticked somewhere far away, but it barely mattered. The world had condensed into the space between us. I felt my shoulders tighten, my pulse drumming in my ears, a quiet rhythm that matched the pull in my chest. There was something astonishingly gentle in her approach. No pressure, no urgency, just the subtle, deliberate narrowing of space that made the moment feel alive, intimate, and infinitely fragile. I tried to ground myself to focus on the mundane task of work in front of me, but my gaze betrayed me. I was caught, completely, by the warmth radiating from her, the faint brush of her presence near my temple, and the quiet gravity of her voice. With me, she had said it so simply, yet it resonated so loudly in every corner of me. I realized in that heartbeat that the late hours and empty office had shifted into something entirely different. The beginning of a delicate, unspoken tension that would pull me toward her in ways I hadn't yet dared to imagine. The room remained silent around us, but between us, it vibrated with an unspoken possibility, a slow, patient tension that promised everything and nothing all at once. And I found myself leaning in, even before she had moved again. We settled side by side at the long conference table. Papers and laptops spread between us like an unspoken barrier that both separated and connected us. I was hyper-aware of the space she occupied, of the subtle warmth radiating from her side, the gentle pressure of her elbow occasionally brushing against mine. Every small contact sent a ripple through me, a quiet reminder of the unusual intimacy that had slipped into what should have been a mundane work session. She pointed to a document, her finger briefly touching mine as she shifted it. The sensation was electric yet fleeting, a spark that made me catch my breath without realizing it. I noticed the way her blouse clung slightly at her wrist, the soft fabric brushing against her skin as her hands moved. Her presence felt deliberate and grounding at once, commanding yet subtly comforting. Even the smallest gestures, the tilt of her head, the way she leaned in to clarify a point, were layered with a warmth that made it impossible to focus entirely on the numbers in front of me. The office lights created a gentle halo around her hair, highlighting the streaks of subtle silver that hinted at her experience and quiet confidence. I found myself stealing glances, not in any inappropriate way, but because every detail about her seemed to pull me in. The calm steadiness of her gaze, the soft cadence of her voice when she explained a complex point, the faint, reassuring scent of her perfume lingering near my shoulder. Each small detail was a thread weaving tension into the otherwise ordinary act of finishing work. We laughed quietly at a shared mistake in the spreadsheet, the sound of her voice low and melodic, bouncing lightly off the walls. Her shoulder brushed mine again, soft, almost accidental, and I felt a warmth surge through me. There was a rhythm to our proximity. Brief touches, long pauses, shared glances that said more than words could capture. Even the act of reaching for a pen, her hand slightly grazing mine, felt charged with a subtle electricity I couldn't ignore. The hum of the office, the distant lights from outside, and the soft tap of our keyboards faded into the background. In those moments, it was only her and the quiet intimacy that had slipped between us. I noticed her leaning slightly closer to read a detail on my screen, the faint scent of her perfume brushing my senses, the warmth from her arm so near that I had to remind myself to stay composed. And yet, the tension wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was tender, like a soft pull towards something unspoken but deeply felt. I caught myself imagining, briefly, what it might feel like to rest my hand near hers, to let the moment linger longer than professional decorum allowed. A subtle, almost imperceptible shiver ran through me, not from cold, but from the realization that she was present in a way that left no room for casual distraction. Every glance, every touch, every quiet word felt deliberate, patient, and weighted with the kind of anticipation that made the empty office feel intimate and alive. By the time we wrapped up our work, I felt a quiet, grounding connection. The shared effort, the fleeting touches, and the unspoken tension had woven a delicate closeness between us. I realized that in this quiet, ordinary act of staying late and finishing reports, something extraordinary had begun to form. A slow, patient pull that neither of us had yet named, but that both of us felt with quiet certainty. After hours of reviewing reports and spreadsheets side by side, there was a pause, a quiet, almost fragile moment where the work ended but neither of us moved. I glanced at her, noticing how the soft glow from the desk lamp highlighted the gentle lines on her face, the quiet strength in her posture, and the subtle warmth in her eyes. The office, though empty and still, felt intimate now, like a private sanctuary where we could speak without fear or judgment. She leaned back slightly, exhaling as if releasing more than just work-related stress. "Sometimes it feels like it never ends," she said softly. There was no complaint in her tone, only honesty, and for the first time tonight, I felt the urge to respond, not as an employee, but as someone who truly understood her. My chest tightened, a quiet mix of empathy and admiration stirring within me. I found myself sharing, quietly, the tension I felt from balancing work and life, the subtle frustration that came from always feeling like there was more to do than time allowed. Our conversation flowed naturally, like two people carving a little space of trust into the night. Each word she spoke seemed measured, calm, yet intimate, as if she had always carried the weight of these late nights alone, but was now letting me glimpse it. As we talked, our shoulders brushed occasionally. Each touch was brief, accidental only in appearance, but the warmth it left lingered. The gentle heat of her arm against mine, the soft graze of her fingers as she reached for a pen, the subtle vibration of her laugh that seemed to echo in the quiet room. These small touches carried more meaning than words ever could, weaving a delicate intimacy into our dialogue. I noticed her eyes often drifted to mine, not in expectation, but in connection. It was a look that invited understanding, that bridged the gap between professionalism and the quiet personal space we were beginning to share. Her presence felt grounding, comforting, yet electric, a paradox that made my thoughts tangle between caution and desire. The conversation shifted naturally, laughing softly at shared frustrations, acknowledging our mutual dedication, and even teasing lightly at each other's work habits. Each laugh, each pause, each glance felt intentional yet effortless. The space between us seemed charged, yet safe, a delicate balance of tension and warmth, of curiosity and restraint. At one point, she leaned in slightly, a subtle movement that drew us closer. Her hand rested near mine on the table, almost touching, almost reassuring. I felt a warmth surge quietly through me, a mix of excitement and reverence. It wasn't just the physical proximity, it was the emotional closeness, the trust, the understanding that had been quietly building over the course of the night. By the end of the conversation, I felt a quiet shift. Something unspoken had passed between us. A connection deeper than the work, more intimate than words alone could capture. I realized that the late hours, the empty office, and the shared effort had created a fragile, beautiful intimacy. A slow, steady pull toward each other had begun, one that was gentle, patient, and deeply human. And in that stillness, I understood that tonight was no longer just about finishing reports. It was about noticing her, understanding her, and letting the quiet tension between us breathe. The work was done. The spreadsheets had been reviewed, the reports signed off, yet neither of us moved to leave. The office had grown quieter, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant traffic outside blending into a soft, almost meditative background. I could feel the lingering warmth of our shared presence, the subtle tension that had been building over hours now hovering in the air like a tangible pulse. She stood, stretching slightly, and I noticed the smooth grace of her movements, the faint rise and fall of her shoulders, and the way her blouse brushed softly against her skin. There was an ease in her posture that contrasted sharply with the heightened awareness I felt. When she turned toward me, our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, everything else faded. The room contracted, leaving just the two of us, suspended in the quiet intimacy of the late hour. Then she reached out, her hand resting lightly on my forearm. The touch was brief, deliberate, and gentle, a subtle assertion of connection without overstepping any boundary. I felt a warmth radiate from the point of contact, spreading slowly up my arm and into my chest. The sensation was grounding, yet it sparked something electric in the space between us. I realized I was holding my breath, aware of every nerve ending, every heartbeat that seemed to echo in the small room. Her eyes held mine steadily, and in them, I saw a quiet vulnerability that mirrored my own. The professional barrier, which had felt so rigid just hours ago, seemed to soften in the presence of this simple gesture. I wanted to speak, to say something meaningful, but the words felt unnecessary. The touch itself, light as it was, conveyed more than I could articulate. Reassurance, trust, and a shared acknowledgement of the unspoken connection we had been nurturing all evening. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume lingering around us, warm and subtle, and the gentle brush of her hair as she adjusted her stance. Every detail seemed amplified. The slight tilt of her head, the way her fingers rested for a moment longer than strictly necessary, the soft smile that barely curved her lips. It was quiet, intimate, and intensely personal, yet completely safe, a moment of human closeness that transcended the office and the age gap that had always felt like a barrier. My own hands twitched, hovering slightly above the desk, as if drawn to the warmth she offered. I felt a tug in my chest, a longing tempered by respect, by awareness of the space we occupied, and by the slow, careful rhythm of the connection we were cultivating. It wasn't urgent or demanding. It was patient, deliberate, and deeply affecting. We stood there in silence for a few more seconds, the weight of the moment pressing gently yet persistently. I felt a calm certainty settle over me, the kind that comes from recognizing something rare and meaningful before it is fully named. This quiet touch, this gentle pause in time, had shifted everything. When she finally removed her hand, it lingered in my memory, warm and grounding. I realized that tonight had become more than just a late work session. It was the threshold of something extraordinary, a slow, steady bond forming between us, delicate and patient, yet undeniably real.